All right, we're recording.
We're recording.
The red light is on.
You can tell it's summer because we're sitting here with the windows open in our nice big open space.
That's right. Future of being human initiative. Sort of. It's kind of like a
home base
thought laboratory. Is that a fair way to say it?
I've never thought of that before. This is our thought. Emma, welcome to our thought laboratory.
Yes, welcome, Emma.
Amazing.
And I do also love the fact that, so we are coming from Phoenix, Arizona. If people aren't familiar, it's one of probably the last weeks we can enjoy the door being open and the
cool
air from
yes.
outside coming in and actually being pleasant. Because we are headed for another summer, another Arizona hot summer.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, obviously, again, Andrew, we have the luxury of having a wonderful colleague join us today.
Yes.
Which I'm thrilled to welcome, Emma. Thank you for being here. Yeah.
Isn't this where we start off with an awkward question in the cold open before we actually get to the meeting?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Usually, right? I mean, that's, our cold opens are, we're starting to get a reputation, I think.
The long cold open.
The long cold
Yes.
open. It starts mid-sentence usually from what I can tell as well. So it's like,
It does, yes.
Yeah. And to add fun to that one, hold on. I'm getting all kinds of error messages from our friends at Riverside saying your recording has stopped. So fun. But this one's the audio is still recording. So
Okay, right.
Yeah, this is when we're like, this is where we need the old studio thing. We're stall for time, as you said. All right, it's going again. I don't know why it stopped. Now the question is, do we trust it? Do we trust our technology? Right? This is where we can launch it.
Implicitly.
Oh,
I mean,
geez,
never
my
question the
goodness.
technology.
Never question it. Just
most of the time, except when you can't.
right.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so technical hiccup aside, we'll kind of start this one over. Hopefully with a platform that doesn't stop on us midway through our awkward open. Well, fantastic. So I think the newer thing that I'm trying when we have guests is to not put you through, Emma, a torturous cold open, and we start the show right away.
That sounds like
a good idea.
Initializing waveform.
Modulating signals for transmission.
Exploring the possible, probable, and preferable futures.
Welcome to Modem Futura. All right, so those of you who are joining us, welcome to Modem Futura, the show that explores the intersection of technology, society, and the possible, probable, and preferable futures, asking deep questions like what will it mean to be human in the future? I'm Sean Leahy, joined by my co-host extraordinaire,
Andrew Maynard.
And today we are thrilled to join us, Emma Frow. Emma, thank you for being here.
It's great to be here.
Let me embarrass you, or try to, by reading your bio.
Go for it.
Okay. So Emma, thank you for joining us. You are an associate professor in the School for the Future of Innovation in Society and the School of Biological and Health Systems Engineering at Arizona State University. Your research focuses on the governance of emerging biotechnologies, and specifically, you've been following the field of synthetic biology for over 15 years since its early inception.
And I would say not following it, but actually deeply embedded in it.
Yeah, that's fair.
There's a bit of a
You can take credit for it. It's just yours. You can just we'll allow that. You can just take credit for it. Right. But also, you have expressed a lot of interest in how scientific communities form and how they design and build infrastructure to support their work. In the past few years, you've become interested in the relationships between control and care in biological engineering. So I think we've got a lot to...
That was really good, actually. Did you write that?
I did. ChatGPT did not write it for me.
No, I'm impressed. I'm going to have to get you to write my bio.
I know. That I feel like, there is like a gray or underground market for like who's really talented at writing bios. Because
I need to know them because I rewrite mine, and next time I look at it, it's
terrible.
So awful. I have to rewrite it again.
Same. I'm the same way. And I've done the ChatGPT thing. I'm like, I've taken, and there's like this embarrassing history, in my documents folder of like bio. They go back like 15 years, and they're all terrible. And so I throw it to ChatGPT or something, and even that, you're like, no, that's too much. Like, it's like Sean is the grand emperor of anything he wishes.
So I did this, and it wasn't quite as bad as that. I really liked my Chat GPT one for about a week. And then I looked at it again.
Oh, yeah.
Thinking,
Well, Sean, you didn't take the bio off my website, which I appreciate.
No, true. I checked. Yes, I did.
So this was a tailored bio for this.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
I did look because I was like, well, because I will admit, I have a bad habit. I'm like, oh, I'm just going to take person X, your bio, right? And then I'm like, yeah, but I never update mine either. And so then I'm always like, maybe I should, double check that before.
Good call.
Before I do that. I was trying to find. Yeah, go ahead, Andrew. I was going to say.
No. I was going to say. So I welcome Emma, and did you have an idea of where to start? I have 1,001 things that I want to talk about, and so we're colleagues, so we talk all the time. But there's still 1,001 things I want to talk about.
Yeah. So Emma, I wrote down. I've got 2 questions for you. First of all, to explain what is synthetic biology? Like, let's start there. What is this?
You have 1 minute.
and I'll be grading it. So
okay. Yeah.
No, but just generally speaking, because people, I think, we talk about biotechnology things and different episodes that we'll talk about. We approach a lot of these components, but I think since we have an expert with us, it'll be helpful to have a better understanding of what we mean when we're talking about synthetic biology, because I think most people are familiar with just regular biology, right? Or at least to a certain degree, right?
So this is the made up stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Is it as simple as that? Is just simply fake made up biology?
Right.
Well, so
what is synthetic biology?
Totally depends on who you ask, right?
Okay. Well, we're asking you.
But so I can give you my take, which is sort of, again, following this group of people, this field over the past 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So when synthetic biology was first kind of coming up with a name and taking shape, I feel like it was really about a group of engineers.
Okay.
Yep.
Coming from mechanical engineering, coming from chemical engineering, and so on, who were looking at the practice of genetic engineering, which by this point was 25 years old, really involved cutting and pasting individual genes around. And they were like, oh, biology is an amazing technology to manipulate for the 21st century.
Right.
Yeah.
Think of the possibility, think of the power. But this is such an arcane craft.
I can just imagine them thinking, this is really messy. It needs an engineer to sort it out.
So this is where it came from, right? So it's really like, look, this is artisanal. They would call it medieval. This is not actual engineering, even though you're saying genetic engineering. Like, what if we were actually to bring engineering practices and ways of doing and ways of organizing and structuring work into doing genetic engineering? Think of the power we could have.
Yeah.
Think of the things we could do with biology.
Right, things we could make. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well,
yeah.
So, it's just to ask a silly question, perhaps. So the messiness of that, does that include things going back to like grafting things or the cross-pollination? Is that what we're talking about in terms of synthetic biology at all?
No, this is really at the molecular
getting
level.
down
This is
in
at the
there.
molecular level, and it's really about even taking ideas like electronic circuitry. What if we could make circuits from genes? What if we know that at the genetic level our bodies operate with all kinds of amazing feedback loops, genes turn on, proteins turn off, and like, what if we could actually begin to harness that?
Yeah.
And design and program at the level of DNA. So it's really molecular.
Right.
Okay.
So it's almost like the cell, or I guess the genome, as an integrated circuit, a microprocessor. And how do you sort of just bolt everything together?
Very
So
interesting.
it's grounded in metaphors of DNA as code, genes as forming circuitry. You can challenge all of those, right?
Okay.
Concerns actually
Sure.
Who would have thought electrical engineers and sort of other engineers would think of the
Who
world
let
in
them
these
in
terms?
there?
Right. Yes.
So the early days were super lively, right?
Yeah.
You get biologists at the table being like, well, this sounds intriguing, but you know that biology doesn't work this way, right? And the engineers are like, we can make it work this way. We're engineers. Watch
force
us.
it.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
So that kind of that sets the tone, right? It's not a definition, but it's like playing with it at that level.
Yeah.
Well, and it's fascinating too, because I think I've been talking a little bit before about like efforts that are going around the epigenetic elements of being able to. This is mostly in the vein of longevity, right? Extending the human lifespan by being able to, through either I would say natural elements. diet, exercise, things that you can control in your environment, to chemicals, or it's maybe perhaps synthetically, right? Turning on or off these epigenetic markers for an effect, right? If you have a disease, well, if we can just turn it off, how cool is that? Or if you have a desirable trait that's not being expressed, we could just turn that on. And so there we have. So have you cracked this code? Can we do this? Let's make Sean better. Can we do that?
Are you open to CRISPR?
Well, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Yes. Welcome to Gene Edited Sean. Yes.
Yeah.
But actually, I just building on that. So I'd actually be fascinated to know your answer to sort of whether you can do that with humans. And I know there's a lot of complexity there. But if you go back to those sort of original microorganisms that the synthetic biology community were really working with, how successful have they been there? So let's keep it simple. Let's forget about Sean and think about a microbe.
It turns out it's pretty hard.
How many years have they been doing this?
Well, like the sort of initial gathering of thoughts and proposal was, around the year 2000. So it's kind of 25 years in.
Yes.
But it's interesting to see how the community has changed over time. But I would say rational design has proved to be very elusive.
Okay. And what do you
right?
mean by rational design?
So,
I mean, you actually come up with a plan. You say, I want this organism to do X, Y, and Z.
Yes. And then you say, and I'm just going to program the code. I'm just going to create the circuits to allow it to do that.
Okay. Yes. Yep.
And I would say, that may be the ultimate goal.
Yep.
We're still a decent ways off from that. And what we've seen come into play is, in order to achieve this, let's do a whole lot of brute force trial and error.
Okay.
So let's design 1,000 variations and see which ones work to have the effect that we want. Right. So we're very far from just being able to look in a catalog, be like, I want, this and this. I want it to glow green and make rubber or whatever.
But that was the original plan, as you said. Yes.
I think that was the goal, right?
Yes.
And it's kind of like figuring out how to get there.
Yes.
So still,
but what is the problem here? And is it simply the messiness of biology? Is it simply we do not understand biology? Or is it just that it's engineers just off in their own little world?
I think it's a combination of a lot of those things, right? So, and it relates to, so there's a mindset of how you approach it, right? And so I think there's still very open questions about, can you force or can you make biology amenable to an engineering mindset?
Yes.
So certainly early on, there were phrases circulating in the community like, evolution is tyranny. Because the last thing you want as an engineer is to program your device and then have it mutate or evolve away from what you want.
I love this. Somebody forgot to think about the fact that life evolves. Life finds a way. You don't want your electric circuit changing into something else.
So then it's like, well, how much are you trying to make it into a circuit? Like, is that the right metaphor to use?
Right.
Is that the right frame of mind?
Yes.
Is there another one, right? So I think we're still playing in that space where it's clearly possible to do some things.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But are we bumping up against the limits?
But I
of what
remember
you
there
do?
was all this excitement. This is going back years, decades now, where people were saying, I've taken this bacterium and I have programmed it to produce this certain chemical or this certain smell or something. And they were really excited about that.
Yeah.
Did that hit a brick wall?
No, and I think you can still do that, right? I mean, again, this is where definitions get slippery, but metabolic engineering has certainly things that, so there's a sort of whole, again, it's like, does a metabolic engineer think of themselves as a synthetic biologist? Some of them do, some of them don't. Some of them come to the conferences, some of them don't. But I think there are some capabilities there that have really improved over time, right? Especially when you have the technology that allows you to test multiple small changes to a metabolic pathway in parallel, select the ones that work well. So we are now in a position where, getting a microbe to make you an artificial sugar or a particular kind of polymer, or even manufacturing a drug, getting much better at doing those things.
But from what you're saying, it sounds like there are some people who would consider that synthetic biology, because you're taking biology and you're beginning to co-opt it and train it or engineer it to do specific things.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not this dream of being able to do anything with the building blocks of life.
It's not just plug and play Lego, right?
Yes.
And it's becoming a deep expert in a particular metabolic pathway, for example. One thing that's interesting there is that, our cells, our bodies, humans and non-humans, incredibly complex and interesting. And one given metabolic pathway, actually with all of the different metabolites and precursors and steps in a metabolic pathway, one thing that I think is interesting with synthetic biology is that we're seeing if you become an expert in engineering one pathway,
right,
maybe it's leading to possible products in a whole range of different places.
Oh, interesting.
So rather than just being like, oh, we're making a drug, it's like, well, actually, we've become an expert in terpenoid metabolism.
Okay.
And this byproduct of terpenoid metabolism is an awesome product that gets used in cosmetics. And this particular byproduct feeds into, an agricultural chemical, whatever. So it's sort of changing the traditional sectors.
It almost feels like there's a analogy here, maybe a very loose analogy with quantum computing. So the thing with quantum computing is we instinctively feel as if it's incredibly powerful, but you don't program or code a quantum computer in the same way as you do a digital computer. You have to learn a completely different way of thinking and doing things. And it's crazy complex. Mm-hmm. So sort of to get from where we are at the moment to where we imagine we might be, we've got to unlearn everything that we learned from digital computers and relearn it again. And it feels a little bit like that.
Absolutely, because you've got biologists who are having to learn more of an engineering approach and mindset to systematize their work. And then you have engineers who have to sort of unlearn perhaps some of the dominant engineering approaches, but learn a lot about biology and how it works.
Yes.
It's a long and very interdisciplinary process, right?
Right.
Hi guys, welcome.
Sorry, we lost you for a second. Sean.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I don't know what's going on. So the video of our recording will be a little interesting today, but that's okay. I'll work my magic and patch it all together. But we're good. It's been fascinating. I'm like sitting here listening. I'm like, I can't yell from across the room. So Emma, I'm curious to like talk to us about care, this idea of care. Like because you're interesting, like as you're talking about, right? Biologists need to learn engineering and engineering need to go and learn more biology. Where does this like two-way engagement of care kind of come in?
This is something that like crept up on me over time, right?
Yeah.
So sort of like...
Because it feels very loosey-goosey. I mean, sort of go into an engineering lab and surely you don't go in there saying, you should be caring more. You should be more caring.
And how do you, like how does one operationalize?
And what are you caring about? Those little microbes? Or
Right. I mean, we all hear these things all the time, especially as they refer to other forms of engineering of move fast and break things. When you're talking about biology, maybe not the best idea to break the thing. But we say these things, or when we talk about futures, we're always talking about what are the unintended consequences? What are the, when there are advantages, who is disadvantaged by these same innovations or breakthroughs or what have you? But so we kind of say this all the time. Oh, well, but it sounds to me like when you're like, this idea of care is interesting because I'm like, exactly, who should care? What are you caring about? And how does one operationalize or otherwise like create a framework to care if it may not be inherent in all of us? I don't know. So help us detangle this web we've created of care in our minds.
So I could talk about this forever. And I think one of the interesting things for me is that, and we can maybe parse this out, is that I think care is useful to think with at several different levels.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So if we want to start even just picking up on some of the things we were talking about, how do you understand biology, for example, right? Mm-hmm. So, the engineering mindset and the engineering profession is really about trying to control substrates, right? Mm-hmm. Concrete, build it, right? Like it's really about trying to build predictable designs, right? Mm-hmm. And again, even just thinking about like, okay, well, how much can biology be controlled? How much of the value, the merit, the worth, of biology actually comes from the emergence, the unpredictability, the adaptability, right? And so there's a level at which, for me, thinking about care and control, it's really two slightly different ways of thinking, or two very different ways of thinking about the relationships in our world, right? And so the control relationship at the level of like the lab bench or whatever is really like cause and effect. Like I am the designer, I want to have this effect on this thing and no other, right? Like I don't want, like if I can fully control something, I can completely predict how it's going to work. It's not going to do anything else. It's not going to, right?
Yep.
But then the thing itself has very little agency, right? It's all programmed in.
Yep.
So is that the way we should be thinking about biology,
Right.
What if we thought about what if we started from thinking about care as a set of relationships, which is much more less hierarchical, more bidirectional, more about responding to each other's needs.
And say a bit more about that, because again, I've got this vision in my head of this Petri dish with a few microbes in, and you as the engineer thinking, I want them to do this, this, and this, and I don't want them to do all the other stuff. So what are you sort of talking about? Sort of you caring for the microbes and the microbes responding, or is it? I'm sure it's more complex than that.
Well, do you talk to them?
right.
I mean, trust me. During my PhD, I cultured bacteria and cells.
You give them the comfort menu. So today, do you want the music? Do you want sort of
I just suddenly have this vision of you giving it like a motivational speech in the morning, like, you are such a great little microbe. I need you to perform for me today. Do not let me down.
Come on, little guys.
Or in comes the bleach.
Yeah. Your favorite radio station is on, but even when you think about it this way, right? Like if you set up an experiment, there's different ways of doing it.
Yes.
There's pass fail, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you die if you don't.
Yes.
If you don't meet the criteria.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? Or there's, what are the variety of responses that my bacteria has?
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Those are actually two quite different ways of thinking about an experiment.
Yes.
They give you different ways of understanding the world. They might lead you down different paths for what you do next, right?
Right. Yes.
And one is kind of grounded in paying attention to the variety of ways in which your cells might respond.
Sure.
And one is very much like, I want you to do this. And if you don't, I'm selecting you out.
Yes.
Interesting.
Right?
Yep.
Interesting.
And of course, it strikes me here. If you go back to sort of some of the foundations of science and serendipitous science, at the core of a lot of science is this delight in discovering something you weren't expecting. It's not about control. It's about opportunities. And it almost feels like you're getting back to that core, which of course has largely been lost as we've operationalized science. And we've said science is all about sort of achieving certain things that we've already decided we want to achieve. But that immediately makes it almost impossible to discover the unexpected.
Right. But if you're an engineer who's looking to build something that fits particular specifications,
you don't want the unexpected.
You're not interested in the unexpected,
right?
Yeah. But we don't yet necessarily know what the design parameters
I was going to say, in some ways, isn't that such a, while you can see there might be very specific things that you're trying to target, right? But by doing that and foreclosing all these, you're essentially you're militating all these other possible discoveries, or just what happened if you let it go one more day, right? Because I was reminded, I can try to look it up and maybe I'll stuff it in the show notes. But I was listening to a podcast a while back, and it's the researcher was working with organoids. And one of the things that was really interesting, they were talking about the expense of keeping all these different experiments running, because they take humans to keep them alive. Also, whatever the goop is you feed these things in a petri dish. But what they were finding was what sparked this memory was this serendipitous discovery of they were letting these things run, and it was, in some cases, kind of forgot about them a little bit. And then we're like, oh, let's review those. And then the discovery was they were doing things they had not thought to even ask.
Yes.
And it was interesting because it was also around, again, these sort of like these brain cell organoids, and that they were turning things on and off in the same cycle of human gestation of embryos. And they were like, this is fascinating because we didn't set for this, we didn't time for this, but it suddenly was demonstrating these same sort of like markers of growth that we see in humans. And they were like, we had no idea this could happen in a petri dish. And then, of course, all the light bulbs went off and so on. But that was just one of those things where I'm like, had they restricted that search down to just a predefined, we were looking for this outcome and this outcome only,
you'll never find that.
They would have lost it.
But also it strikes me thinking about care, and you said there are multiple levels to this. And it feels like one of those levels is caring about what you're doing and why. Not just sort of saying we're doing this because this is what we have to achieve in a very narrow sense, but thinking about it in a much broader context.
I think also, so again, if we want to step it up a level, right, to this, so care operates at that, the level of individual experiments. But also when you think about, again, the field of synthetic biology was like, we are going to design. And one of the things that we really want to do is we want to be able to separate out the creativity of design from the drudgery of making.
Okay.
There's value judgments put in those terms, right?
Drudgery.
Oh, drudgery. Yeah, I can find you papers with that word, right?
Well, hey, I like making stuff.
Tediousness, drudgery. So the sense in which actually like the practice of doing that laborious, painstaking lab work is understood in those ways, but is also devalued. So and they're like, no, like as a student, like you don't need to we don't want you to have to worry about those things. You can spend your time designing and let the robots do the work for you. And again, so when we think about, again, it's like, well, care is always a practice.
Right.
Care is about what you choose to attend to. Right. And so again, when you're thinking about how we're setting up like how this field is being set up and what they're doing and the choices that they're making, it's very much saying like we think design is the creative, important part of this. And the making of it is, it's just a means to an end.
Sure. And this idea sort of immediately comes to mind of you invest in what you care for. And you don't invest in what you don't care for. So if you don't care for the process, the hands-on thing where you are nurturing and building, you obviously don't care for it. And if you don't care for it, you're not going to invest in it.
So it's interesting, right? So in the past 10 years, again, this is what happens when you follow a field for a long time.
Right. I believe it was, checks notes, 15 years.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, so, so what happened was that early on, there was this like, we want to be able to rationally design. Sure. And then like hit a brick wall. I know we can high throughput design. So about 10, 15 years ago, this big push for funding funding proposals for these entities that are being called Biofoundries.
Okay.
So that are, it's very, again, evocative, very engineering-y terminology of basically sort of, and a lot of money going into like high throughput robotic equipment to be able to design and build and test hundreds of genetic circuits or strains, microbial strains in parallel, right?
Okay.
So a lot of a lot of energy and interest and excitement and money pouring into, especially getting these things set up. I've spent a lot of time talking to the individuals who work in these spaces.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
It's pretty stressful a lot of the time because there's this vision that's painted that like the robots will do it all for you.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
That is so far. I mean, this is not new, right?
Yeah.
But actually, like that's so far from the case.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that you have to become really conversant in, now you're trying to negotiate software, hardware, and biology.
Right.
Yeah.
And
troubleshoot and do your own tech support probably.
On all of
when
those.
it all goes wrong.
Exactly. And
like
it
your
always
cameras
does.
in a podcast recording.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
But at least you didn't have to be like, is it the cells? Is it the media that I'm feeding them?
Yeah.
Is it the salt? Right? Like they have to become experts in all these things.
Right.
Yet at the same time, that labor is devalued.
Yes.
Because people are like, well, you
the
said
robot,
you could turn this around in 2 weeks, and like, where is it?
Yeah.
Right?
We gave you I presume $1 million X whatever robot. Why is this taking so long?
Right.
Like where is it? Where's our engineered cool thing we wanted?
But then coming back to this idea of care, you've now got the care between the people who are setting these biofoundries up and the people who are actually working in them. So I guess this is all part of the hierarchy. It's that relational thing with who cares for what and whom.
It's a service provider for the designers.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Is how it's essentially being pitched.
Yes.
At the same time, there's so much involved. I mean, these are design spaces in and of themselves, right? Because we don't yet have. We don't know how to do this yet. So I think, again, there's that sense of care and control, I think, plays in at the level, too, of attending to, like, how are the relationships between people and machines and cells being configured? Which one has priority?
So
what are we caring for?
A couple of questions here. So how do things change? If you begin to look at all of this through the lens of care, how potentially can things change for the better? What difference does this make?
I think, for me, sort of using the lens of care really tries to attune me to thinking about what are the relationships that are being formed, right?
Yes,
so not just thinking about the output or the tech that emerges, but how are we actually structuring the relationships between humans and robots and cells and DNA and so on?
Okay,
what are we valuing in that system? Are we just, I mean, there's another thing here. When you're trying to do hundreds of things in parallel, you're basically treating the DNA and the cells as incredibly expendable as well, right?
Yes.
So DNA becomes like a a code book or source book to mine. You hear a lot about like biomining, right? Like prospecting.
That's not a good term,
right?
Like
prospecting for genes, right?
Yes.
Which is totally understood.
Yes,
but it's
an exploitative relationship.
It sounds. It has roots in that act. It sounds like it's extracting rather than the careful. Like we're nurturing this or changing it, or it's like give me that. Like it's almost like an ownership.
I'm going to mine the database to see 50. I want 50 variants of this gene that appear across different organisms. I'm going to make them all. I'm going to take all of them. I'm going to put them all into the cell, and I'm going to see which one gives me the best outcome. So it's like it's sort of decomposing life, right? It's into different component parts, and then like playing with putting them back together again.
So
but I'm going
to be devil's advocate here. So because I'm sure somebody's listening, thinking, why not?
Exactly.
DNA is a resource. Why not mine it? Why not exploit it?
There is incredible value to be gained, right? This is how you sell it. This is how you sell a field or a technology, right? There's value to be gained from reconfiguring the word in this way. Exactly.
Well, and we talk about this. I mean, I think mostly has been under the topic of artificial intelligence, but with any technology, right? There's that level of, well, it doesn't matter what harms happen because the greater potential, if we crack a few eggs to make an omelet, like everyone enjoys breakfast or what, I don't know, it's a tortured metaphor.
I'm not sure you can go too far. Right.
But this idea that the long-term benefits far outweigh the short-term cost of let's go get, doesn't matter. Why? Of course we should do it.
Benefits to whom?
Well,
who decides?
That's hugely debatable.
Well, and in this case too, like the field as a whole is, there's as you might imagine, the promises are endless, or the hopes are endless. But a lot of them do tie into questions around, say, well, we want to transition away from a fossil fuel-based economy. So actually, if we can coax biological organisms to make us our plastics and our enzymes and our detergents and so on, then we're reducing our dependency
on fossil fuels, and
which might be considered, right? So at that point, you're like, well, is it,
But then presumably thinking of things in this sort of framing of care doesn't actually stop us doing that. I can imagine that you could actually go faster and better if you're actually thinking about those relationships between sort of everything that you're doing and why you're doing it and who is doing it, rather than just having that very narrow engineering view saying we're going to extract stuff to make something else.
I think this is it, right? It's a chance to rethink. How do you want to construct a field, right? How do you want to, and are you happy just to accept or to say, well, we'll deal with those consequences down the line, or we will attend to them throughout the process, and we'll really, again, I think if you're thinking with care as an idea, then you're sort of starting to think about, okay, what are the relationships that are, and those connections, and how can we steer them?
And of course, if you're looking at another sort of engineer, if you're systems engineering, or if you get involved with systems thinking, you know these things. So you look at complexity science, and anybody in complexity science would say you're an absolute idiot if you just think you can take a very narrow view of things and forget about all the interconnectedness of that. But then you take that to another level, and you look at sort of biological entities that behave in unexpected ways. They evolve their behavior over time, whether it's everything from sort of microbes all the way up to sort of fully fledged humans. I mean, you cannot approach those systems without thinking about the relationships at every single level.
Well, and there's really nice cases of this already in the field, right? Where people are like, oh, actually, we can produce this drug. So a lot of emphasis early on about trying to produce the anti-malarial drug artemisinin.
Yes.
Okay.
Massive technological achievement to be able to do this in yeast at scale at a decent cost.
Okay.
This was at a time, they put the efforts into this at a time where the price of malaria drugs were very volatile. But by the point at which they were able to manufacture this drug at scale at a decent cost, actually a lot of policy interventions had come into play at the global scale that had helped to stabilize the prices of the drugs, right? So it's also understanding the system, because there's a lot of sense in which, we can basically create these biosubstitutes that can drop in, like drop-in replacements, invisible in our everyday consumer lives. Maybe there'll be a bioplastic word, but actually integrating a drop-in replacement isn't as simple as that.
No,
when you get to you're feeding
you
into
end up
existing
finding
supply
the solution
chains.
to the wrong problem.
Or there's a complex existing supply chain with power dynamics and established orders that you're actually having to intervene in.
So I'm trying to think of how the best way to phrase my question. So when you're talking about that, one of the things that it's making me think too is around this idea, again, as we're making these changes and dropping them in, right? That if I put the hat on, that would be more concerned about because there's probably someone out there listening who's going, but what, you shouldn't be playing with nature in that way. Right?
Full stop.
A full stop, right? But all the way to when we think again about unintended consequences, right? So I'm curious from that perspective of care and how that sort of is, pervasive through this whole pipeline of the way of approaching these kind of things. How to balance sort of that, bio-containment, right? What if you make something and it doesn't do, or it does maybe, it does the thing that you narrowly were like, we want it to turn blue to red. It did it, cool. And then it also turned around and then destroyed an entire population as an unintended side effect. Yeah. How does to that point, right? How does care interact with this ability of the social trust of creating these bioengineered elements? And how do we know, that they're done in a way with that care so that there's been due diligence and it's not move fast and break everything. Mm-hmm. And how do you work with that trust between the people who are voting for politicians, who are making the policy, who are creating the companies, who are buying the products? I mean, all this ecosystem around it. How do you navigate, and what role does care play in that, the navigation of that trust between, how do we make sure that we trust the things that are coming out of these biofoundries are not going to destroy the world or us or our crops or kill the pet we give this medicine to.
Remembering that Emma has got sort of strong collaborative relationships that she doesn't want to undermine.
Well, no, but these are conversations that you can have, right? I mean, and I think this is also, so if we want to think of now, again, another way that I think care helps me think is with this sort of responsible innovation angle, right? Which again, when you think about relationships with, when you think with care and you're thinking about relationships, it's less about just a focus on the production of the technology and more about the system around in which the technology is embedded. Yep. And so that again, speaking of containment, for example, my research group, we've just done this whole set of case studies, maybe not synthetic biology, but certainly genetically engineered organisms. For a long time, almost all of the genetic engineering work that we do at the moment is kind of contained. Right? Okay. It's in laboratories or it's in vats, right? So we use a microbe to make a drug or a chemical, but it's in a bioreactor.
Sequestered away from the real world.
And then, we kind of extract the material, bleach the cells, all is good.
Yep.
GM crops are an example of an engineered organism that is out in our world.
Right.
Sure.
Right?
Yes. Yep.
But there are more and more examples coming to the fore. Now, one of the things that again, in the spirit of healthy debate with my scientific colleagues, one of the things we've done is I noticed in conversations a lot of the time, scientists and engineers would be like, yeah, we're building this technology. When we're thinking about this technology, it's going to go out into the world.
Sure.
Gene drives. I don't know if you talked about that on the podcast, but these, I don't know, dire wolves, whatever, right? Like these living animals or these living organisms that have been engineered that are no longer really behind walls. Right.
Yes.
Right.
And in conversation, in the presentations and so on, you often hear this okay, we're going to make these, we're working on this thing, but don't worry, we're building in a containment mechanism at the molecular level.
Trust
we're going to stop it getting out of hand.
That's the technological fix.
Yes.
Right? To any so again with the control mindset, so it will be where we want, when we want, do what we want, and if it stops doing that, it will self-destruct.
Right, we've got a kill switch or something.
We've got a kill switch.
Then containment is not necessarily a physical container, but it's a way of containing the unexpected consequences.
And it's a mindset or it's an approach that is really about maintaining a separation between the organism and the world, right? And so as a sort of friendly provocation to my fellow scientists and engineers, I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't be thinking about those technologies. Those are important things to develop. But to assume that will solve the problems,
right?
And or prevent any other social, political, ecological issues from emerging, felt like maybe that was a question that we needed to explore empirically.
There's a certain degree of naivety there.
Yeah.
So,
well, and again, it comes back to some of that human exceptionalism. Like we just because we've thought of how we think it can be contained, do we know it can be? Like
exactly.
There's always that error of risk of again.
There's a reason I teach from Jurassic Park.
I know. Well, and you've already used the quote.
Good.
Right.
So good.
And you've already used the quote. Nature finds a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need to put like an AI generated Ian Malcolm in here, to join us. But it is that same. It's that same. And that's what it triggers in my mind is like, and to me, that's why I hope with this provocation is you can plan for these things, but you need to be thinking very deeply about. You may not be able to fully think about what is actually needed because we can only go as far as we can go, and it's I think a very an arrogant thing to express that human engineering could outsmart nature to this point.
And so what we did was we looked at 11 case studies. And what we did was we sort of set the technology within a socio-technical map. And we were like, here are...
And you should explain what a socio-technical map is.
So basically we said, what does there's the technology, but then there's the world. And it has economic structures and legal and regulatory structures. It has ecological aspects. There's public, there's cultural values. There's, right?
Yeah.
And so what we did was like, we told the stories of these 11 these 11 genetically engineered organisms designed for being out in the world. And we looked at kind of how these other factors intersect. Now, this wasn't like a project framed around care, but it's actually about, again, what are the relationships? How does this technology fit into the world? It's not just about saying, we're going to build in a kill switch and that allows us control. And, it's like, actually, no, when you're putting it in the world, it suddenly enters a different space. It's a messy human, political, social, there are economic stakes. There's all kinds of things going on. How do we understand that? And what can we learn from that? And it's sort of a plea in a sense to the community to say, alongside whatever technical innovations you're considering to control it. Think about actually how it's going to forever be entangled in the world as well, right? Which is, again, comes from that mindset of saying this isn't just about the control of an artifact, but acknowledging that it is in a world. And how you think the world will be strengthened or weakened through your design.
Right. Well, and also perhaps, forever change with an inability to ever pull something back. Right. Well, once it's out, I mean, and also again, I start thinking, and this is where my brain instantly starts going with these things, is also thinking about, again, even it's more easily thought of like the first order magnitude of like, if this gets out or goes whatever, like we can see this happening, sure. But then eventually as you start moving into second, third, and fourth, like, I mean, we talked about this with like the dire wolf or whatever, like what happens in 50 years as those genes are passed? Like we don't know, and we can guess, but we don't know how those will interact with other things the amount of variables that can come into play to change the behavior, the makeup, the whatever, like we cannot foresee that. And so,
but this seems to be where relationships come in as well, because relationships are all about sort of understanding how to sort of respond and adapt to a changing dynamic environment.
And I think this ties into these questions of responsible innovation, right? Your responsibility doesn't just finish at the point where you've designed a technology. It's about creating an attachment to and a responsibility for that technology in the world. If you're designing it for the world, right? Which as engineers, they often it's not just an academic project. And caring for what happens, right? And so again, it's sort of trying to think through how do we actually create that sense of, because it's not just, if you're thinking with care, then you're not just focused on the technology, you're focused on the relationships around it. How do you begin to foster an awareness of those relationships, a sense and a sense of responsibility for those relationships.
So I've got to ask you, because I know you're a consummate academic, but you work with scientists, you work with engineers, you work with real world companies. It's not as if you're stuck in your ivory tower. How do people respond to these ideas? So you go to a hard-nosed company that is trying to make stuff and make a profit.
That has shareholders that are saying, we need a return on our investment.
Do they just say, we don't care?
No, they don't, actually.
I mean, good. I think that's relieving.
At least in my experience, they don't. Because I think there is there's an awareness of the power of biology, for example. I think there are examples where synthetic biologists understand that, and they see, for example, so synthetic biology is being presented as a platform technology, right?
Right.
I like the way we all say, right.
Yeah,
what's a platform technology?
It's not just about making drugs. It's like if you're developing a toolbox or a toolkit that you can use for engineering all of life in many different directions, right?
Yeah.
And that there's a lot of choice over which directions, right? So what kinds of products or what kinds of avenues are you going to choose to develop? Some companies actually. So there's one of the big synthetic biology companies in the U.S. Maybe it's the biggest one now. Is called Ginkgo Bioworks. They explicitly use language of care.
Right.
Oh, that's nice.
It was very interesting to see. And they say, we care about how our platform is used. So they're not just trying to develop the tools.
Yeah.
They are deeply concerned about the types of products that might be created using their platform.
Right. Yes.
Right. And so it's an opportunity, but it's hard.
We've got World Ender brought to you by.
Exactly. No, exactly.
But use it responsibly.
Yes.
It's up to you how you deploy your world-ending viral.
And this is where it gets deep back into the technology, because you're like, okay, we created this platform. And now, oh my gosh, whoops, you can make, make world-ending things or good things. But actually, can you, if you acknowledge that, how deep can you go back into thinking through the design and the structure of your platform and how you're putting things together such that you are privileging knowledge and the ways of doing things and the types of products that you think will lead to good in the world. Right. Even though you can't predict, and even though you have not, you don't ultimately have control. Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, right off the bat, I mean, I'm struck by this. Again, thinking about like the circular economy of pieces of these components, right? And how cool would it be if we can synthetically engineer these things to reclaim like very toxic rare earth elements. I mean, the lithium batteries that are in all of our stuff that are in all the electronic vehicles that right now they just go into a dump because there's we can't recycle them. We can't reclaim them. What if we could? But then it's like, but then what is that? If your microbe could eat that nasty stuff, what else could it eat? And how, even again, I just think of these, there's no shortage of these sci-fi, and a lot of Michael Crichton stuff, Prey, like all these like nanobot, these things running amok, doing all these kind of things. But again, you start thinking of like, what does that circular economy look like? And how do you and I don't say this as like, how do you control it so that there's no problems, but how do you work within that, knowing that every step along the way, as these things are created or even untested through the time in nature, like over time, maybe we have, that one is completely inert after it does its thing.
Yeah.
Others will not be, but then it is that piece of how do we continuously.
And it seems to be that actually thinking about this, actually asking these questions actually changes how you begin to think about the future.
Yeah.
And this is going to be probably a lousy metaphor, but it keeps on going.
Can't be worse than the egg one. Don't worry about
it. Okay. So you sort of troubled me with the egg one, but I mean, thinking about care and relationships, I keep thinking about human relationships. So if you form a relationship with somebody, you don't sit down at the beginning of that and say, okay, these are the rules. And then you forget about them, assuming that those are going to sort of determine your relationship for the next 10 years. Relationships are messy. You've got to be able to sort of evolve and adapt. And even though you know clearly where you want to be, and where you want to be is a strong relationship sometime in the future, you know that you're going to have to be constantly adapting on the way. And it feels like that sort of in the real world. So you can imagine a synthetic biology company, if they just start out by saying, okay, we're going to sort of design all the rules from the get-go and then just let it go, and they've got a clear endpoint in mind, they are never going to reach that endpoint because relationships are messy.
I think this is it too, right? Like it's very easy to think of care as some sort of lovey-dovey word. Right. But the minute you put it into our own human lives and context, right? You're like, actually, it's messy. You can care deeply for somebody, but they may
bad
not.
Days.
They have good days, bad days. It's you have to be responsive to. You might care. You might express your care in one way, but it might not be well received by the other person, right? Care. You can make mistakes, but it's about owning up to the mistakes.
Right.
It's about working, right? Like it's not about being perfect, and it's not about It's about being in it, being in for the messiness, acknowledging the messiness, and working. So it's practice, right? So again, I think this is where it draws our attention to the practice and the relationships, because you're thinking like, what am I who am I upholding? What am I upholding? How am I doing this? How am I being accountable? How am I serving others? How is that relationship working? I'm not just telling them what to do. I'm actually, we're together. We are trying to construct a better world. How do we do this?
No.
Right?
I love this way of connecting because it makes perfect sense. If we're to be part of building the sort of future we want together, whether you're a sort of a big corporation or you're an individual, having that understanding of messy relationships, but actually having that willingness, that care to build what you want together.
And you have to make decisions. And it's not always pleasant. And So it's not, but again, it's about, you can embrace that, right?
I don't want to yell at you, but you're forcing me. Exactly. Put your shoes on.
Please go to bed now.
This is going to be my next career, by the way. It's going to be a relationship counselor for the person in their lab with their microbes. Okay, so microbes. Just tell me how you feel about that.
Oh my goodness. I yell because I care. It's incredibly fascinating. And I think, Emma, I think what's coming through to me anyway is again, this how incredibly valuable this idea of this it's not something you do and you're like, we did our care study, sealed, signed, stamped, we're done, we're good. We can build our world ender. But it's this practice, as you said. I really like that term because that is a thing that is just, it is a thing that becomes part of the way you think, the way you approach the work, the way you approach and I'll say the work as like the all-encompassing work. So that's not just what you're doing in your lab, but that's also what your lab represents, where that thing goes, what's the point of it. But as these things are sort of holistically intertwined, you're constantly asking those questions. And of course, for me, it's always the Jurassic Park quotes of like, just because you can, should you? But whatever your question is, that's that idea, right? That is, as you are not moving fast and breaking things, but moving carefully, right? Is thinking about, with all of these actions, what are the possibilities? Where are the and again, looking for those unknown places of harm by even just asking those questions changes the way that you approach. Should I drop this in here or drop this in there? I think that there's something really powerful about that. I mean, beyond, biology,
but hard and concrete as well. The more you talk about it, the less fluffy it seems, and the harder and the more important it seems.
I mean, going back to something you said, actually, this is my colleague Sam and I 10 years ago now. I was like, oh yeah, we wrote that a long time ago. We wrote a paper that was playing with two different ways of thinking about the phrase taking care of.
Okay.
Right? Yes. And I think this, and again, for me, this comes out of, again, I've been in this field, they've been very keen on responsible innovation and so on, right? But there's a way of thinking about responsible innovation that becomes a box ticking exercise because depending on how you do it, it's basically compliance, which there's their phrase taking care of, kind of mafia style. Like we took care of it, so we don't have to worry about it anymore, right? Like you take care of a problem.
I take care of my mother and I take care of business.
Exactly, right? And so it's like the taking care of.
This is great. I love that.
I think the responsible innovation, how it's initially being layered into a lot of emerging technology fields is basically like, what are the this is a requirement. What are the tick boxes? So we can take care of. We've ticked the box to say we don't see any anticipated problems with this. Therefore, we no longer have to think about it.
It's a removal of an obstruction or whatever. Yeah.
So I'm the annoying person, right? Like my role in a sense, right, is like being there and saying like, actually, it's not about just like ticking that box and taking care of the problem. It's about how do we create a field or an infrastructure or an area of where we can design in processes to be continually taking care of, right? It's not like you can just say like, sorry, I'm done making dinners. So like I've taken you got to make dinner every day.
That's right. With your daughter, you're on the clock. Okay, I've taken care of you now. It's up to you.
It's up to you, right?
Done.
But that's in some ways that's the engineering fallacy of total control. Is that you say I can control for everything. So there's no unintended. There's no unintended consequences. And so it's about breaking those assumptions apart, which also requires building new infrastructure into a way of being, right? Because you can't just like have a form that says like, okay, I thought about it, there's no issues, therefore there will never be any issues. I'm done.
Well, it's like having sort of key performance indicators for your marriage.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Quite work. Exactly. Should we revisit the KPIs this year? Are they right? Like,
Lord, no.
Yeah. No, this is what I signed up for.
Right. I don't recall that. I don't. It's suddenly you're always like you're on the witness stand. I don't recall saying that. Nope.
But I've got to add this in. So so this has just got so many thoughts going on in my head. And of course, we started with synthetic biology, but it strikes me when we look at what's happening with artificial intelligence at the moment, this feels remarkably similar.
Yeah.
So of course, we're not developing sort of systems that are alive, but we're developing systems that are highly complex, highly fluid, highly unpredictable, highly emergent. Yeah. And it feels like everything you've said about care also applies to how we develop and use these systems as well.
I would argue it's across.
Yes.
Yeah.
Across new technologies, right?
Yes.
But one of the things
is,
you know, I also think this is a call for social scientists, humanists, philosophers, and so on, again, to become long-term embedded practitioners in fields.
Yes.
So that it's, because to do this work, again, you need to get it, the devil's in the details, right?
Yep.
It's not just like, oh, here's a form. We created a generic form.
Right.
Off you go. You can do, right?
Go
It's
have
about,
fun. I took care of that.
Right?
Or engineers coming to you saying, teach us how to care.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like that's
Must
not how it
know
works.
to care. Must be programmed to care.
I think it's about having a lively, interdisciplinary, friendly but challenging community where you can be saying, look, I'm seeing all these conversations happening in AI. You're focused on this, this, and this. But what about, have you thought about the relationships? Have you thought about the outsourcing of, content moderation? Or have you thought about the data sets and who's curating and caring for them and what data is being generated to go into these, right? Like all of those things, but you need those critical questions being asked and then also strategies for how to attend to them in new ways.
Yeah.
And that's a lot, right?
Well, it is. And I think, again, just these parallels across, I think, all emerging technologies too, because again, a lot of those unintended consequences are similar in the sense that these technologies are new. We don't have the longitudinal viewpoint to understand how they interact. And so it requires that sort of constant questioning, but I'm always stuck and I get torn between the tension then, because we, as time moves and you have other gigantic motivators like profit and money and status, you have people, or in some cases, organizations and companies that would say, stop. It's like, stop. You become if you are that champion of asking and pushing for care in some, I would argue these are negative outcomes, might be even seen as you become the very obstacle that group wants to remove to get out of our way. Yep. Let us do this at all costs. We know what we're doing. Yep. We've taken care of it. We tick the boxes.
Yeah, right.
We've done our care according to this sheet, whatever. And now just stop, move out of the way, let us do our thing and let us, rule the world. But there's this tension then. And whether it's AI or biology, I'm like, the fear and the concern that I have is it comes down to the individual in some of those cases. And so I don't know how or what insights you might have in terms around policy. Like, how do we work with governments or government agencies or policies around the world that can champion these things to become part of the fabric that is required of these places to do? Not an easy, across anything, this is not an easy task.
Or even, can you require it? Can you sort of regulate and legislate care?
You can't force someone to care,
right?
Yeah. Like at the foundational level, you cannot.
Right.
You must care.
Right.
Like, right.
We're going to keep on whipping you until you do.
I'll take care of that.
You can appeal to, the better part of human nature, or whatever, right?
But to Sean's question, I wonder whether there are ways of framing things so you nurture care.
I think this is it. And I do think that, again, there's no silver bullet, right? This is thinking about multiple different levels.
Yes.
So, for example, to go back to the synthetic biology community, in the US and in Europe, for the past decade, more in Europe, but more recently in the past decade in the US, pretty much any funding call that comes out of the National Science Foundation in the US will have a sentence in it for even the most technical of synthetic biology calls. Attention should be paid to ethical, legal, social issues, which opens up a door. So it's not mandating you must work with but it opens up the door and has led to some really interesting collaborations, right? I think these are slow, right? Again, these aren't immediate changes. This is about sort of sensitizing communities, funders, regulators. It's about sort of sensitizing people to this very different way of thinking.
Yes.
It's not cause and effect. It's regulating based on a different set of, can risk assessment take anything other than safety into consideration? Right?
Yeah.
In the biological world, that turns out to be reasonably tricky to implement, right?
And it strikes me with you saying that. So my experience of many people in these fields is that they want to care. In fact, they do care, especially in the biological sciences, but even beyond there. But the number of people I've spoken to in industry, especially with startups, who are saying, I care deeply about what I do. I care deeply about its impact in society, but my hands are tied. And the number of people as a result that say, I need somebody else to give me license to do what I know is the right thing to do. And that's where, to a certain extent, sort of governance and regulation comes in. It gives them the ability to do what they know is right.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think, current market structures are not encouraging move slower and in a more considered way.
It feels like putting flowers in front of a bulldozer, where it's like, oh, that's nice, but not stopping, the momentum that is being driven by profit and power and all these other things. And so, and again, that's why I was raising that, is like, that comes down is it's like, who then, to Andrew, your point, that those individuals are having to be forced to make, in some ways, that judgment call. Do I do what I know is right and risk losing my job, my financial security, my healthcare, and all these kind of things, right? Or are the pressures so great that I just stay quiet and fall in line and hope that it doesn't eat the world, literally.
Hope
or
somebody else cares.
Yeah, hope someone else cares. I think, and again, whether that's in a synthetic biofoundry or in a, working on the latest AI tools or facial recognition, whatever's. I mean, I think these are cutting across all these sort of technology spaces in terms of that, exactly that care, asking those hard questions,
and having the willingness to form relationships where you can have those hard discussions and actually sort of change and evolve and adapt.
And I think some of it is being strategic too, right? So again, it's one of those things where you can feel, Sean, you've presented the sort of like that sort of like ultimate disempowerment, or like the system, like it's just not right. Like
there's nothing to be done.
We're all working within systems, right? And it may be that at that very large level, there's a limited amount that you can actually do to really change the system as an individual. But you can have smaller networks and conversations and allies and identify conversations, and maybe it changes the work that you're doing slightly for the time being, or maybe it gives you an idea that you can't quite execute now, but maybe an opportunity comes up and you can mobilize it down the line, right? So I think some of it too is being, is being realistic, but also but then the counter to that is not just abandoning all hope, right? Which is in some ways how you feel sometimes,
and in some ways as a goal, right, of having an individual feel so overwhelmed by the fact that they cannot single-handedly change a system that their response is to give up and walk away and no longer care.
Right.
Like letting go of that.
Yeah.
And then we have a runaway, perhaps, which is, dangerous. That's absolutely fantastic. I'm loving that question. I love it. And the phrase you gave me of care, taking care of, right? This is just, I'm having so much fun with this in my mind right now. So like, it's just a fantastic way of approaching it. Cause I think that is very much, is this just a pro forma thing? Or are you actually asking those difficult questions and searching, discovering what are those, because anything, while it might take longer to go through those challenges, have you thought of this? No, but now we need to, because you're right. Now it does this other thing, and we didn't know it would do that. So is that good, bad, whatever? While it might take longer, at the end, you have so much more confidence that when these things are enacted or used or released or accidentally escaped, however it might happen, you have this pedigree of, we've exhausted what we could.
Right.
To learn as much as possible. And therefore, here is our risk with these things.
And again, I keep on coming back to this idea of relationships. So if you think about the relationships that survive and thrive versus those that don't, one of the defining features is care. Those relationships where there's care, even though they're hard, thrive. Those where there is no care, do not.
As I think we are, and we might argue as a world that we're in a moment of rethinking our current ways of doing and being, right? So again, can we take this as an opportunity to say, okay, what's not working?
Right.
You know, what is working? Again, we may not be able to radically overhaul everything, but also like, how do we, what are the relationships we want to strengthen or, you know, more value? So it's like, we all have limited time, but, you know, spending an extra few hours a week on nurturing certain kinds of relationships or community building or whatnot. Yep. I mean, you know, the coffee hours often translate into like really cool new collaborations or great ideas or whatever, right? Yep. So, you know, I think we can easily get ourselves into a mindset where like, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. I have all these pressures. Yeah. But actually, again, so it's a slower cultural change or shift of a reorienting of like, what are the things we're investing our time into? And as you and recognizing it's again what we value. So is it just about outputs, right? Or is it like, well, you know, through this I forged some new collaborations. I've got the possibility like, oh, this led to a very innovative new idea rather than just like another variation of the same old, right? But we know how that works and we know how to patent it and we know how to profit off of it and we know how to do whatever. It's like, oh, actually we've come up with something like qualitatively different as a result of this new way of thinking and you know, exploring it.
So we've come up with a solution at the end of this. Coffee time.
Coffee time.
Or tea time.
Coffee time. Well, I think that's amazing too, because again, you know, thinking about it, taking kind of like a futures perspective, right? I mean, that's one of those pieces of when you think about all these different possible scenarios and, you know, everything from the worst case output to the most like, you know, utopian, wonderful, everything is perfect kind of thing. And you're working through those, trying to figure out what are the steps we take to stay away from the outcomes we do not want. What are the steps we can take to get towards where we're thinking? I mean, that's one of the things that's so important about catalyzing those conversations is to be able to say like, okay, today, how do we do care? How think what happens then if this happens? How do we think about that? So as you're stepping through these moments in time, whether it's your own personal timeline or that of an industry or a profession or an organization, whatever, you start building in this intentionality of thinking about where we want to go, where do we not want to go, what are those conversations we need to be having to surface decision points, where surfacing the uncertainties, where are our blind spots, where are new avenues for acceleration or opportunities. And I really like that we can kind of instantiate that in a practical way, in some way that's not just this fanciful futures talk and you know that kind of stuff, right? That there is an intentionality to it that can yield a safer existence for humans, but also exciting in the short term for new research, new possibilities, new treatments, new efficacies. Like, you know, that's amazing.
And to always just be thinking about, right, with going back to this relationships, what are the relationships that are being strengthened as a result of the actions we are taking or the technology we are putting out there? What are the relationships that are being weakened or devalued?
Yeah.
And if you're always asking those questions, right, it lends a very different, so you're like, oh, ChatGPT, it's a technology. But if you start asking the questions, what relationships is it strengthening? What relationships is it devaluing? That maybe gives you, it gives you places you can begin to think about what you might want to do to address that balance.
That's right. And it doesn't say that you might not still go, you might surface, well, this is weakened, but we have to do it.
Right.
And that's okay in the sense that, but it becomes a choice. And you can also then have the transparency of we did the due diligence. We looked at this. We knew that this is a cost to whatever the benefit we're doing. We're okay with that because of the reasons A, B, and C, and whatever, demonstrating that the care was done to look at that and then maybe it's a judgment call that because of the time we are in at that moment, the judgment is we're still going to pursue this, knowing this expense or this cost is going to happen, but because of, you know, again, fill in the blank of your care sheet. This reason, right?
But again, it embraces the messiness.
It embraces the messiness.
It recognizes that
transparency.
Life is messy. Decisions are messy. There is never the right way or the wrong way forward. But actually thinking about things, thinking about those relationships, those consequences of what you do becomes vitally important.
But it also makes you vulnerable.
Yeah. Oh.
And so I think this is
I like
right.
that just as we begin to wrap up, you throw another thing into the conversation.
No, like it makes you accountable, right? Like you just use the word accountable, Sean, which is like, yes, it does, but that accountability can also be vulnerability.
Sure.
Yes.
And so again, it's right.
Yeah, like you can't plead the fifth on that one in the sense like.
And so I think this is where again this is where like at a higher system level, right? We need to like, again, rethink how we value transparency and accountability and whatnot, because if all it does is make you vulnerable. So care is a vulnerable thing, right?
It
like those relations. And so, but you know, we layer in a lot of things to try and like avoid. It's not fun to
be vulnerable.
Be vulnerable and accountable.
But it opens up possibilities. Again, going back to relationships, you can't have a strong relationship if you're not vulnerable and if there isn't trust there.
Exactly, right? So I think it is like when we really pay attention to those things, how can we find the strength to lean into them? It's not necessarily opening ourselves up to everything, right? But what are the decisions that we're really consciously making that we are willing to stand by? And, you know.
Yeah, I mean, they're also, you can't live in this space where you're so consumed by chasing every pathway, right? You go into this like analysis paralysis kind of mentality when nothing gets done. Then nothing moves forward, and so it's fine. Where's that balance? And that's a constantly shifting point on a spectrum, right? And at some point decisions have to be made because nothing is infinite in that sense, right? So it's crazy.
We should probably wrap this up. We're going to have, Emma, we're going to have to get you back.
Yes.
Because I think we've just touched the tip of an iceberg here.
Yeah. Otherwise, we're going to sit here for the rest of the day.
Much more to be said. Yeah.
I know.
Fantastic. Emma, I don't know if there's anything in particular you would like to share or plug in terms of like, where can people get more of your work? Is there a good spot for that? I mean, I can stuff everything in show notes too to make things easy, but I didn't know if there's a, if you have anything that you want to plug in terms of like easy places to get your work.
I wish I had like a fancy website. That's like on my to-do list, but
Google is really good. Actually.
Yeah.
Google Emma Frow.
Yeah, that's true. And I'll link a bunch of stuff too. Yeah. So like the reports and stuff and all these great thing where you can dive down into and learn about Biofoundries. Like how crazy.
They're wild places.
That is fantastic. Yeah. Well, why don't we wrap this up then?
We'll
wrap
end this up.
Yep,
yes.
Fantastic. So Andrew, thank you so much for this. And Emma, thank you for joining us on Modem Futura. This has been fantastic.
Enlightening.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I'm going to go away today thinking constantly of this care of, and probably be making lots of jokes about it. I am using this everywhere, I think. That's
the little mafia icon or the little,
I know. It's like, it's always like, it would be a shame if something were to happen to the, we'll take care of that.
This is the dark side of care.
Oh my goodness. I know. There's something very enjoyable about this. So thank you. If nothing else, I am going to run with this concept for a while. So thank you, Emma. But thank you for joining us today, Emma. This has been an absolute treat. And this has been fun to sit in the Future of Being Human Initiative Mind Laboratory.
Yes.
With a nice cool breeze, which will be the last we get until probably November.
October.
Yeah, I was going to say, somewhere in there. So awesome. Yeah, I will
until next time. Yes.
Yeah, until next time, I'll put everything I can in the show notes, and we'll see you on the next episode of Modem Futura.
We'll see you then.
Demodulating signal.
Modem Futura is a production of the Future of Being Human Initiative at Arizona State University. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. To learn more about the Future of Being Human Initiative and all of our other projects, please visit us on the web at futureofbeinghuman.asu.edu.
End translation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emma.
Despite all the glitches.
Oh my God.
Great.
Poor Sean.
I know.